about what does engagement look like, because a lot of people see the real high potential for consumer engagement. Well, what does that mean, and what do you do once you get them engaged? We're going to look at things like, this has been around for a few years. Some of the ideas that were great ideas 2 years ago, people are getting a little tired of it. There's a little bit of fatigue around some of these things. So what is that going to look like? How does it look if we have persistent location? Big issues are, if you're a brand manager, how do you convince your management to spend any money on this? What's your return on investment? What should your objectives be? And so we've got things looking at that. We're looking at things like data. What's the important data to know? And for those of you who are trying to get all this funded, what are people funding and what are they looking at? So that's the program today, but it all comes back to this fundamental question, which is, what does it take for brands and advertisers to really start understanding and spending significant amounts of their ad spend in this space? The good news is every year it moves a little bit forward. And in the last year, we've seen some real progress. We've seen some pivots and some change of directions. But I think every year it moves forward, and I think the audience here is indicative of that. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to introduce our first panel. The first panel, actually, what we're going to do is look in a social network, but not at the big social network, which comes later in the day, but look at more of a vertical social network, and specifically travel. So travel is an interesting one because it's a huge market, a lot of money spent on it. Location is an obvious component of travel, unless you watch the travel channel from your couch at home. And social is a big part of it as well. And so what we're going to do today is pick travel out as an interesting sort of vertical application and have some people talk about what's going on with that. So let me introduce our panel moderator. He says, looking to the wings, hoping to see the panel moderator. Tyler? Either that or there's Tyler. So Tyler Sturkle is with Mondo Window, and he's going to moderate our panel. So, good. Your mic?
Hello, thanks everybody. Welcome to Social Loco 2012. Can everybody hear me? Does this work? Is this thing on? Yes. Hey, welcome to Social Loco 2012. Thanks for getting up so early to come to our panel. Thanks for Mark for inviting us. It's great. So I am going to introduce the panelists now, and then we'll dive right in. So why don't you all just come right out and take your seats. Hello. So here we have. Are you in order? In proper order? Okay.
I was just having some right.
Okay, so on stage right here we have Nancy Ramamurthy, who is VP of Product Management and Marketing at Tripit.
Morning, all.
All right. To her right is Kevin Fleece, who is General Manager and VP of Products at Room 77. And to Kevin's right is Derek Butcher, who is CTO and VP of Digital at Afar Media. So, all right, thanks everybody. So, travel is such an obvious thing to be talking about here. It is a huge sector. It is almost $2 trillion globally, depending on how you do the math. It's forecasted to grow to well over $3 trillion in the next couple of decades. It's the biggest sector in the economy and the biggest employer in the economy. People dispute that, but no one disputes that it is absolutely massive. Travel is in some way the ultimate use case for Solomo principles and practices. It's inherently about location, people, and movement and time, and it's about discovery, navigation, connections, and commerce. And the travel landscape is changing really quickly for many reasons, but most importantly, it's ubiquitous personal handheld technology that is location aware, as we all know. That's what we're here to talk about. And also improving infrastructure worldwide has a lot to do with the improvement in Solomo principles and practices in the travel industry. So what's the travel tech landscape like right now, and where is it going, and who does it well, and who does it maybe not so well? So we'll launch right in. So first, I want to introduce the discussion by talking about the travel cycle, or the travel arc. And this is a concept that travel industry analysts and experts talk about, and it is the totality of the travel experience, from dreaming about where to go, to making plans, to purchasing tickets and travel plans, to traveling to the airport or whatever your means of conveyance is, getting on the plane or the train or the car, going to the place, being in the place, wandering around, experiencing it, sharing your experiences while you're in the place, getting back on your means of conveyance, heading home, and sharing the experience some more. And that entire arc, some people talk about a 60-hour cycle for an average trip. And that entire arc is the travel cycle. And there are many, thanks to Solomo principles and practices and technology, there are all kinds of points in that travel arc that we can take advantage of now that we used to not be able to take advantage of. It used to be you'd sell someone a ticket, and then you sell someone, a ticket to a ticket to travel, and you sell someone a ticket to an event or an attraction at the destination. They eat some food, things like that. But there are all of these points now along the way for planning, inspiration, and social sharing, and inventory management in the travel sector. So we have a missing panelist who is delayed in travel. He was on his way back from the Middle East, and he's waiting for a connecting flight, appropriately enough. His name is Abrar Ahmad, and he is a partner at Travel Capitalist Ventures. And Travel Capitalist Ventures is very self-consciously, I'll presume to speak for Abrar, Travel Capitalist Ventures is very self-consciously trying to invest in all points of the travel cycle using this emerging travel technology as an entry point and a way to leverage this enormous sector for his venture, all of his ventures. So I'll start by asking Nancy about your view on the concept of the travel cycle or the travel arc, and how Tripit leverages it. Maybe you could say a word or two about Tripit. I'm sure everyone knows Tripit.
So how many folks are actually familiar with Tripit or use Tripit? Oh, wow.
Of course.
Awesome. This is great.
Forgot.
So at any rate, so you're all familiar with Tripit. I would say Tripit, because it's the one place that organizes all your travel in one place, it's certainly got relevance across the entire trip life cycle. We're probably strongest in the pre and the in-trip cycle. Pre-trip, we make it super easy to organize, plan, publish it to social networks, publish it or share your trips with your friends, on an individual basis, and get help with the planning portion of your trip. In-trip, basically, we're the one app that's going to have all the stuff that's going to keep you on track and stress-free. So we've got all your travel information, details. We're leveraging your location in terms of driving directions, understanding where you're going to be from your itinerary, also layering that with social. We've got a network tab where essentially you can see who's traveling close to you, who's going to be near the destination that you're actually going to. So it's a nice, I think, sort of aggregation of social, mobile, location, using the context within which you're in to deliver the right experience. So that's probably, that's Tripit in terms of the in-trip experience and the value it delivers.
Kevin, can you say a word about Room 77 and how you...
Sure, and I'm going to start with the same question that Nancy did. And this is going to be really humbling for me. How many people here have heard of Room 77? Hey, that's better than I was expecting. All right, great. So Room 77... It's your crowd. Yeah, that was about at least 70%, I would say, right? Room 77 is a hotel meta search site. What that means is we are a search company. Really kind of pride ourselves on, fast search, faceted search, and we help consumers scour the internet to find the right hotel at the right price, and we go one step further, which is we get you into the right room at the hotel. So we're very much focused on the shopping and fulfillment side of the business, with starting to dip our toe in the water into the in-trip experience as well. So we have a mobile application that you can use to shop and book, but you can also utilize to review your room and share your check-in and your photo. So we just think the travel landscape around hotels is extremely fragmented, and we're trying to pull it all together into a very neat, simple, fast search experience. Think of it as, Kayak was built as an air search engine. We're starting as a hotel search engine, and we have no aspirations to do anything but hotels. It's about a $30 billion industry in and of itself, and that's what we do every day, both on web and mobile.
Okay, Derek, you need to say a word about FAR.
Yeah, I'm with FAR Media. So we are a little bit unusual in the sense that we've dipped our toe not just into the web and mobile space, we also have a print magazine. And there's sort of a discrete reason behind that. Our feeling is that travel is something, so most of what you think of as online travel is transactional, booking engines and the sort, a little bit of review type things with TripAdvisor and such. But one of our sort of hypotheses as to why that is, why the sort of inspiration and planning stuff hasn't migrated as much from offline to online, is because there's an authority issue. So if you're spending money on a trip, the worst thing that could happen is you have a bad trip, and you can't get that money back, you can't get those memories back, whatever. So unlike a lot of other things where you're spending money where it's either a smaller amount or there's ways out, there isn't with travel necessarily. So the authority of the source that's giving you kind of that inspiration or those planning guidelines is important. So by establishing the magazine first and kind of building the brand around that, the idea is that hopefully we kind of establish that sense of authority. And then the online and web product is what we call a collaborative travel guide. So the idea is that users, passionate travelers, people in the travel space, and so on, are building this guidebook from the ground up. So we're trying to span kind of the entire travel cycle that Tyler referenced, from inspiration through kind of planning to booking, and then we close the circle with what we call journaling. So that's when you're essentially recording your experience, uploading it via our mobile app or through the website to then in turn share with other travelers. So
the unique nature of travel, you can't go back to the store and return your time and your memories and get your money back. There's a very unique aspect of travel in that it has to do with the time specifically. I also like what you said about the authority and having a print brand that's very trusted with a community around it of people who also trust the print brand, I think is really important. I think there's a first wave of social travel tools. TripAdvisor come to mind, concepts, and towards something more intimate and bespoke.
I think the social aspects are super important. Obviously, your friends can be a great reference. But we used to have this saying that we kind of use internally, it's not who you know, it's who you need to know when you're traveling. Oftentimes your friends don't travel the same way that you do. They haven't necessarily been to the same places. So to the degree that you can connect with people that have similar interests and leverage more of that interest graph rather than maybe that social graph per se, or even both to some degree, I suppose. But the interest graph really, I think, is maybe more relevant to having a great travel experience. But again, you have to establish that sense of trust and authority that the people that are in this community, and in our sense also, of course, the editorial aspect, that it's trustworthy and that you're not, something that you can sort of go to as a go-to place when you're thinking about travel.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, Tripit is turning into a bit of a Swiss Army knife, whereas Room 77 is very consciously trying not to be the Swiss Army knife and trying to specialize. How do you see that shaking out? I have how many hundreds of apps on my phone now, and I don't use most of them. I use some of them. They're great. But what's the philosophy between the Swiss Army knife in terms of social, local, mobile versus the hyper-specialization?
Yeah, well, I guess, what we're doing really is the core value that we deliver is around organizing all your travel in one place. So the thing, I guess we haven't really thought of it as being a Swiss Army knife. It's really using mobile, social, and location in a relevant way to help you organize and stay on track and remove that stress. So we're not really thinking of each of these as like separate technologies, but it's more about bringing these things together to help you stay stress-free, to stay on track, to add value during your trip, to create sort of that perfect business trip. Like that's our aspiration, is to continue to delight travelers in a way that's really relevant. So we've actually tried to stay relatively narrow in terms of organizing all your trips and making it easy. But we do see, eventually for Tripit, over time, that's going to be a foundation for helping to solve other problems throughout your trip life cycle. But I hope that answers the question.
Yep. Kevin?
Sure. As we're an e-commerce site, we're very much, at the transaction, at the point of decision for the consumer. Am I going to buy this hotel or that hotel? Who am I going to buy it from as a meta search site? And I think one of the things we're starting to look at is this whole notion of social commerce and social proofing, which is, I think as Derek was talking about, if there's a way to intelligently tap into my friends at that point in time, or as I'm, in the late stages of planning, I'm going to Boston, let's say I've pinned 5 hotels that are interesting to me. Which of my friends have been at those hotels? What have they said about those hotels? That is one factor in that decision-making process, right? It's not the final factor. Price is a huge consideration. Location is a huge consideration. But, having evidence from my friends, obviously that has greater value over reading anonymous reviews. So, we see that as a key evolution. It's something we're just starting to work on, is the social commerce integration. As a way to make the decision-making process more comfortable for the consumer and help them make a better decision.
Right, so the travel space is increasing. It's always been fairly crowded, because just partly because of its sheer size and its attractiveness to developers and business people. But who's doing it right now? I mean, we're all sort of feeling our way around this a little bit, and these solo-mo practices and technology are pretty young at this stage. You know, what else is young? What's not mature, and who's doing it right, and perhaps more controversially, who's doing it wrong, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think TripAdvisor has, you know, obviously a great reach. I don't know that I mean, I think it's challenging for anyone who's been in the space for a little while to migrate and be more mobile-centric. And also, I think, you know, that aspect of, as Kevin said, of leveraging your kind of that trusted, you know, social recommendation versus anonymous reviews is certainly important. So I think they may have some challenges to some degree, but of course they also have a lot of assets in their favor. And then I think in terms of people just getting started, that's what I think makes this space so exciting. That there isn't necessarily a clear, you know, there's a lot of small players like us, and you know, there isn't someone who's really sort of, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity for someone to really rise up and capture this market using, you know, mobile first and leveraging, you know, social graph / interest graph. So yeah, I don't know that anyone springs to mind per se.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, mobile, I think everyone's finally got it right. We've been talking about it for a long, long time, and so people are there. But in terms of really bringing together a super tight experience using mobile, social, location, context, and wrapping that in and delighting travelers, it's an aspiration that we have. I think we're still sort of in the 2.0 stage. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity ahead. So we're super excited. A lot of the location technologies are pretty near. I mean, early stage at this point. So near field communications, all that good stuff. But
You know, when I think of, you know, big opportunities, those guys have huge opportunities to innovate in mobile, but it's hard to kind of pivot that aircraft carrier when you have a decade's worth of inertia around the web. And Derek talked about mobile first, and I think you look around, and many of the startups now are starting mobile first, designing for mobile web, designing for mobile apps, and then porting to the desktop. And we know that, you know, in 2008, mobile bookings for hotel was only $20 million. In 2010, it was $200 million. Probably 2 years from now, it'll cross $1 billion. So it's quickly catching up and stealing share from the desktop experience. So the incumbents have a lot of resources, but they have a lot of organizational inertia, which makes it difficult for them to change.
I think the other key aspect is that customization aspect, which I guess is more in the social. You know, social is one way to differentiate and make things more customized, but one challenge I think that the traditional booking engines have is, you know, initially that was, you know, very revolutionary. You could, you know, cut out the travel agent, book your ticket online, but now it's more of a commodity play, and you're kind of competing on price. So if you don't have something that is unique, where you can customize your experience, you know, much like Room 77 with, you know, pick your room, or you know, the Tripit thing, and so on and so forth, I think that it's hard to stand out and really, you know, be an entry point for that whole process. So I think that's kind of where the traditional big players are having a challenging time, and I think that's where someone like a Facebook or even a Google, also, it's, you know, it's such a one-size-fits-all solution that if you can't sort of narrow the scope of that and really, you know, provide that kind of customized entry point or that value differentiation, it's going to be tricky.
yeah.
What's really hard about that nowadays? What are the big challenges that remain?
Sorry.
What's really hard about that process that you mentioned right now? What are the big
in terms
challenges
of the
that remain?
customization aspect? I mean, I think it's just, again, everyone has their own unique travel style, and there's so many variables that go into this whole process, and there's so many unknowns, and a lot of it is subjective, not objective. So you have a site like Quora, which is really great for answering objective questions, where there's like a kind of a single right answer. But whenever you're dealing with people's opinions and their preferences and their style, especially for something that is far away, where there isn't a lot of information, I think that's the big challenge, is how do you tailor that experience to the individual, essentially, on more than just price.
Michael, step right up.
Beckman from Here Planet. Curious about when you're addressing customers, maybe some of your lessons learned, some specifics in terms of when you're addressing via mobile, also the social mobile local experience, and giving users too many options versus, I want to speak, maybe it's the Swiss Army knife question, but what have you learned in terms of focusing how you deliver your offerings to consumers and how much you give them? I'm really curious about the narrow focus versus the broad and how you deliver that experience.
So one thing we do is we're not interested in bad reviews. We're definitely not a review site. Like I mentioned earlier, our basic unit is what we call these highlights, and the idea is we don't care about your bad experiences. We don't care about your entire photo album. That's great you share that on Facebook or whatever with your friends. But if I'm not, if I don't know you socially necessarily, I don't care about, your dog that jumped in the Trevi Fountain or whatever. I care about, the highlights, the best parts of this trip. And so that's one way of sort of cutting through the information noise factor is only having the things that people considered were great, and then slicing and dicing those further by, interest-related keywords, essentially.
And one of the challenges that we face, especially as you're thinking about sort of the privacy issues, location, there's a lot more sensitivity around that, is we do, and I'd say this is still a challenge that we're grappling with right now, we do give users a fine level of detailed control over how they can share their trips, private, public, individuals, broadcast, automatic. And there's clearly, the more options you deliver to users, the more confusing it can potentially be. There's almost too many ways to sort of turn the knob. So I think right now we do have the ability to give fine-tuned control. We see that that's what our users are looking for, but at the same time, particularly as we sort of cross the chasm and get into more of a mainstream audience, we're going to have to continue to refine and simplify that process so that everything that we do is automagic. You don't have to think about it. It's hands-free to the extent possible.
Yeah, and I guess as a search/e-commerce site, I think the big difference for us is what you serve up to the customer on your desktop is far greater in terms of inventory and variety than what you push to your mobile device. The mobile experience has to be a much more curated experience. I think there's a high degree of fatigue with applications when you're delivering too much data. It also slows down the performance. I know this doesn't have to do too much with social, local, but this is the mobile element, and I think the key thing there is curation. It's really thinking about people have much less time to interact with a mobile device than they do with a desktop experience. They're dealing with a much smaller form factor. So what we found is, we'll deliver an infinite scroll on the web experience, and people will oftentimes book hotels in the 80th plus position. But on a mobile app, it's really nailing whatever it is you're delivering, whether you're a media site or a content site or an e-commerce site, those first 5 to 10 nuggets of information, those results have to be really, really spot on. So curation plays a huge role on the mobile side. That for us is a big difference.
Yeah, curation I would say is very key for us too. What we're trying to do with my company, Mondo Window, is curate geolocated content across the internet in the context of in-flight entertainment for connected air travelers. And so as you fly, you can learn about the land below you and about your destination city. One of the data sources we use, the geotag data sources, is Flickr. And if anyone spent 2 minutes on Flickr, you'll know that it's all about cats and babies. And that's not particularly interesting to an air traveler who's flying from A to B and wants to know what's going on down there. So curation is a constant process, I think, when dealing with massive amounts of web content.
The other thing I'd add, actually, that Kevin's kind of riffing on that, the mobile first or mobile being a major component of your strategy is, especially in the travel context, we're so used to having always-on access to our mobile devices when we're in our hometown or our home country. But in the travel context, if you're international, either you don't have coverage at all or it's prohibitively expensive.
App stores are really locked down internationally.
Right, and so I think another whole sort of thing that you have to think about is offline caching and having that data, curating that data down to the point that what you care about is going to be there even if you don't have, an actual active internet connection.
right? I think a lot of restrictions around app stores and mobile carriers are really hobbling the travel industry in terms of this particular revolution that we're talking about. There are big access issues still in terms of infrastructure, mobile infrastructure, and app store access. So I was given the time signal. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. I'm looking forward to more great conversations and speakers today. So thank you, panelists.